Welcome to Testimony Mountain. It's such a joy to be here with you and to be here with Jessie. I always love being
Yeah,
with Jessie. And
always a
we,
good conversation.
yes, and we had an amazing time this last, well, I guess it's 2 weekends ago now, but
Mhm.
with Beautifully Adorned here. And how soon until that is up on your website for people to purchase?
Yeah, that should be available probably June, July, is the timing we're looking for. But we have had Casey, who was there with us, that I do the Watchman podcast with several times a month. He and I had a great discussion about it. So I encourage people to watch that episode. He talked about all the things that happened there that were just so meaningful to him. And really, it was just such a powerful time. I know even though I was kind of, teaching and directing things, that I just felt the Lord moving so powerfully. And I couldn't have asked for, a more beautiful, better venue. It was so gracious to have it where we did because there was something, it wasn't like too big, but at the same time, it wasn't too small. Like it was just perfect. It had that, that homey environment, which made it feel more safe, I think, for a lot of people. So I actually got a lot of compliments on, you know, your hospitality and graciousness in that, and people just really enjoyed it. So good venue.
Thank you. Well, we're looking forward to hosting you again in October.
Yeah,
So that will be fun to see how it
definitely.
shapes that up. And it was a joy, to have everyone here. And I have to admit, a couple days before, I was like, oh my goodness, did I make a mistake? Is this going to work? But it was beautiful. And I
But we
really,
made it work. That's part of the fun of the process. You got to figure out all the challenges and, but it turned out really well. So,
thank you. Thank you. And so we were just kind of chatting beforehand about what kind of to share, and I was just sharing with Jessie not too long ago. A friend and I went to a big conference event that we'd been connected with this ministry in the past and hadn't been for a while. And my friend comes from a New Age background, and she was able to spot a whole lot more things than I was coming from a Christian background of occult symbolism and different things that were present. And, it caused us to have a lot of amazing conversations in the midst of it. But, really talking about how do we as Christians walk this out, not from a place of fear,
mhm,
but
right.
from a place of wisdom. And, where has this stuff crept into the church? And
Mhm.
how do we spot it? So we'll just kind of launch from there, whatever you'd like to share, Jessie.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of, that creeping in, and I think it has definitely. It's not anything new. Like I
Mhm.
think it's been there all along. It's just we weren't taught to recognize it. So, for me, I know one of the first things I start to look at everywhere I go, is the symbols I'm seeing in the buildings, the architecture. Um, it sounded like you guys spotted some of that. If you want to maybe share some of the
Yeah.
things that you saw.
So they were in a new space, and so they didn't have time for fully decorating. But what was there was kind of a honeycomb pattern or hexagon, type of
Mm,
shape um, all over the walls in different places. And even the light fixtures were kind of in that format. And the funny thing is that later we were actually driving by, and on the highway, there was that same pattern on the
mm,
on the on the walls of the highway, portions. And it was just like, oh my goodness, sometimes when your eyes are open to things. And um, but I think, part of the struggle for us was like, okay, it looks like a honeycomb, and there's biblical things in the Bible about honey
mhm,
and the bee. And so looking at it from a Christian perspective, you're like, well, that's good, sweet as honey, sweeter than the honeycomb, in different passages of
right.
scripture. So,
But then you get to the Solomonic magic and the occult and know that that hexagon, represents, you know, s ritual ground and, different things like that, where they're gonna be summoning and yeah.
I mean, I think part of the challenge comes in is, are they aware of it and doing it consciously, or is it
Or is
subtle?
it just like design, like is it what's they go to the store and that's what's kind of being pushed and they're like, "Oh, this is really cool. Let's go with that." They may even think like you did, like, "Oh, the Bible talks about the honey and the honeycomb and you know, and they have no clue that they're putting all this symbology within their building, you know?
And so I know a lot of people lately who are becoming more and more interested in sacred geometry. And
Mm.
is it all bad, or is there something positive that the Lord put in
Well, I
design?
think at the core of it, we have to remember that it was created by God, you
Mhm,
know, that He spoke it into existence. He's the one who gave, you know, to His spoken word, He gave height, breadth, depth, width, so we have to always remember that we serve such a creative, amazing God. Everything that He created was by design,
mhm,
meaning that, He created it by that design to function and operate and to accomplish His word, to perform it. Um, so, I always keep that in mind. Now, where we have some of that, twisting or that perversing, that comes from the enemy. That he takes those very things of God and makes it something associated with evil as well. So we always have that, that kind of that dual mirror of
mhm.
something that's good and right and true, and right next to it, the same exact thing also means something that's, bad and ugly and perverse. So, um, I think we need to always keep that in mind and then the question becomes, well, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
Do we get rid of everything that the enemy attaches meaning to that's not good, or do we redeem it? Do
Mhm.
we, give it back to the Lord?
And I think that's the challenge, is a lot of Christianity has just run away from it, um,
Mhm.
and been afraid of it, and we don't wanna walk in fear of it.
Mhm.
Um, but then, the practical steps, what do we do with it? How do we make it so it's
Mhm.
holy again and appropriate?
Right. And I think for that, I think where I always start is I will ask the Lord
Mhm,
and say, I mean, if I have control over whatever it is. So let's say, you were one of those people. You went into the store, design store, and you picked out something that was popular. You put it all in your church, and now you find out, oh my gosh, it, means something bad. Um, instead of just destroying right away or getting rid of, I always stop and pray. I ask the Lord, Lord, is this, according to your will? What is your will in this matter? Do you want me to get rid of it? I'm willing to do that. Or do you want me to anoint it and redeem it, give it back to you? And let the Lord lead you in that. Um, I've had the Lord do very interesting things. Sometimes it's not the answer that I'm expecting that He's going to give, especially in that redemption mode. Um, sometimes we miss out on the most beautiful miracles because we don't give the Lord the opportunity to redeem things.
yeah. That is so good. And again, that's things that we have control over. I
Right.
know I was kind of surprised. I went to a friend's house one time, and her couch had kind of the swirl patterns that, are identified, with pedophilia, and I know
Yeah.
that's not a part of her at all. But it just happened to be the design, that she purchased or was given to her or any of those kinds of things. And so um, we get to walk it out.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah, and we see that, it's hard because, when we're um learning to kind of understand these symbols and the different things that we're seeing, our auto reaction is to automatically put something evil connected to it.
Mhm,
Where everywhere we see the swirls, we're saying, "Oh my gosh, that must be a place of pedophilia."
mhm,
And that's not always the case.
mhm,
You have to have other indicators, other things that kind of go along with that. Um, we can't be quick to judge. We have to kind of allow the Lord to lead in that process. And yet, when we find out that it is something that's not evil, we need to be quick to obey the Lord in that, to get rid of or
yeah,
um, dispose of things that He doesn't want us to have.
mhm. Yeah, and there was another beautiful part of this service that I think it's the intention was beautiful and is beautiful, is that, when people would come to give their offering, they often have a gift there for you, some little something with scripture on it or something, and being connected with them for years, I collected, all of those and saved them until probably my last move. And I was kind of like, I probably need to clear out some of this. But, this time coming, knowing what I know now about how the occult can release, curses onto objects. And because you gave, and you received the gift, that was an
Hmm.
act of permission. And so it was one of those things of going, first you're kind of shocked when that realization hits, and not saying that leadership is doing that, but even if they had a volunteer who was, pretending to be a Christian, but was releasing it over, the baskets and so on.
Hmm.
Um, and in a moment there was like, oh, get me out of here type of thing. But then it was like, no, I'm here for a reason. So Lord, I just release your blood over every
Hmm.
gift that's given, every gift that's received, to just cover over that. And so that there's no curses going into people's homes.
Right.
Because it was like, what a brilliant way of the enemy to get cursed objects into Christians' home, is through something like that. And
Right. But yeah, you don't, it's at the same time, like you don't want to be quick to judge. Like if it really, you know, it's good to ask the Lord, if the reaction is because of, triggers from
yes,
your past or your abuse, or if really, those were the intentions of their heart, because the enemy can use it the other way too, where then in fear we don't receive maybe a word that randomly the Lord had for us that day.
yeah,
You know, sometimes it feels like it's difficult um, to walk through and navigate these things because, I know for many people there's an uncertainty in not necessarily knowing all the time, not knowing the hearts of the people that are there. They can look good, but,
mhm,
how do you get to that place where you really know um, whether the people that are, serving you in those situations, really if their intentions are good or not, you
mhm.
know?
Yeah, that is the challenge, and I think that's part of the body, of Christ coming together.
Mhm.
Because, like, I was glad that my friend Nikki was with me because she had some information and some background that I don't have. And I think a lot
Mhm.
of Christians, what I've seen is when they kind of are trying to get out of religious boxes, they go, oh, there's good stuff here in the New Age, or there's good stuff over here, and Christianity's been afraid of it, so they've just pushed it all away. Um,
Mhm.
and so they're like embracing some of these things. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, but if you say anything, then they're like, oh, you're just operating in fear. And I think there's a place of wisdom and from
Right?
relationship with God, discerning these things. But it,
Absolutely. And not to be quick to, throw those discernments out the window either,
mhm,
to really stop and listen. And as scripture says, test the spirits. And we have every right to test if it comes from the Spirit of God or if it's coming from, an outside spirit like a fallen angel or a demonic spirit. So we need to not be afraid to do that either.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was an area particularly, there was a dance presentation that was given, and some of the people who, were at the, training the dancers and so on come from a native culture where certain things are, and so like they had face paint on. And what was particularly startling was these three lines over the left eye. Um,
Hmm.
and so again, do you go, is it just cultural? Is this connected in the negative stuff from, the native culture?
Right.
Or, you know, so it's challenging.
Hmm. And navigating, discerning that too. Um, I think for me, what I'm thinking at the moment is that, in those moments you get hit with these triggers, and how do you, navigate those triggers? And, the only way that I found to do it is just to say, okay, Lord, show me, like,
Yeah.
show me what's behind that. All this imagery is getting thrown at me, that revolves around a culture that, they acknowledge God the creator, but they don't acknowledge, Jesus Christ or his death or resurrection. So, um, how do I, navigate that? Is this just a fun play? Or like, I think the harder thing for those of us who have been through satanic ritual is that, a lot of times for rituals, there would be ritual prep. So
Mhm,
it very indeed could be a play that you're a part of, that you're having to act out. But in that, like, you're learning, how to be precise for when that time of ritual comes. So
mhm,
for many of us, plays and other things can be triggers, because we see elements that are similar in that play to, ritual prep things that we went through.
mhm,
So how do you separate that? Your next fear is, oh my gosh, like, are these children going through ritual prep? Or am I, involuntarily, yet because I've even just walked in the door, I'm now willingly participating in a ritual,
yeah,
which can all be horrifying thoughts to survivors in the moment of things.
yeah. And it was interesting, even just the frequency of, the performance, and one of the leaders was wearing red shoes, but at the next meeting, he changed his shoes to a different color. Now, did he just want to change his shoes? Did he know what, red shoes implies? Is every red shoe bad? It's kind of those questions putting out
No,
there.
no, was he wearing it with a robe? That's the next question. What did
No,
he have a black robe on?
no,
I
no.
mean, you're just sitting there like, "Oh my goodness," like, the distinguishing, the red shoes.
Yeah. And yet the very next session was led by different leaders, and it was so powerful and beautiful. You could
Mm,
feel the spirit of the Lord. It had a different feel, it had a different frequency.
mhm,
Uh, and so anyway, these are just things that, are out there, that can be confusing or fear in, generating. But the Lord, I do believe, can give us discernment to walk it out in wisdom.
yeah, absolutely.
And that was the thing, is there was a
So
part of me
yeah.
that's like, "I'm never coming back again," and then it was like,
That's what I
"No."
was gonna ask, what was your end kinda reaction to all of that?
Yeah, is that I really think that it's that place of, really in relationship with the Lord, hearing his voice to stay or to go. Um,
Mhm,
and, I had some questions about some other friends that I know that are connected to that ministry. Um, Maybe they're not aware, maybe they don't see it. Some of them work in deliverance ministry and things like that. And so it seems like some of these things would be obvious, But sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes I know that people are called to stay within, um, some place called by God to be salt and light in that community.
Yeah.
And
That's very true. I think back to, some of the churches that I've gone to where they were the ones where it's like, "Nope, not coming back here," and, you know, like, for me, I would pick up, I guess I didn't grow up learning it as, Mason or Templar or, those type of terms. Like, I knew Luciferian Brotherhood and, um, protectors.
Mhm,
So, it's like there's been times I've gone into churches and they're smaller, usually Southern Baptist or Lutheran, um, and I went in to this one and it was like, the men automatically will come and greet you, shake your hand, and that's usually, the first thing, like, if they go in and all of a sudden, like, you find yourself, where they're just, like, grabbing on here,
mhm,
for me, it's like, okay, like, now I'm alert.
mhm,
Is this person a Mason, And then, usually as they start with the sermon, you start off with a Bible passage where, they'll cover a good deal of it, but then pretty quick, you start to pick up on the brotherhood, talk where they're sending messages, why are all the men there at church? Because they're there to get their weekly message and assignments that they're going to fulfill out in the community. And, that's how I hear it. I don't hear the word of God. I hear, here's your brotherhood assignment and your quotas. Do your due diligence, because God forbid you don't do your due diligence, then, there's going to be consequences. Um, so I pick up on stuff like that. And then, the epitome of it was then, the one time they all, it's like, okay, men, let's enter into prayer for this young man. And they call a young man up to the front. And all of a sudden, all the men are gathering, but instead of a normal gathering where you're just gonna like come around, put your hands on,
mhm,
everybody, it's like all of a sudden, like along the front of the altar, you've got all the men kneeling, not towards God, but towards each other,
mm.
and, I'm sitting there like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in the midst of a mass amount of Templars, of protectors," and it's like, "Alright," and then they do the recruiting thing, "Oh, well, you come once, now you're family, we're having this event next week, and, we look so forward to seeing you next week," and you're sitting there like, "Just let me out the door because 'cause I'm not coming back," you know? And every step you take, you've got somebody coming in, "Oh, I'm so happy you came. We'll see you next week." And you're like, "No, no, you won't. I'm making my way towards that door. Let me out."
And it's hard because, as Christians, we should be that family. We should be embracing and encouraging,
Right.
but again, when you see those signs, and like, I, part of my programming was to be extremely naive and accepting
Mm,
of anything and everything. And I mentioned one time, about how my parents took all fiction out of my life. And so
mhm,
it was like you only said what was true and didn't. And I can't remember if I shared this on that. So it was such a struggle for me because I just believed anything anybody said, And so if
mhm.
you're being warm and friendly like that, I'm just gonna believe that you really want to see me and you really have good intention for me, and not realize other agendas. But shortly after we were married, and my husband had so much fun with this because I was so naive. And we went to, I think it was Universal Studios, and it was like just after their Jurassic Park, exhibit or thing, ride.
Mhm.
and they had printed out this thing, telling the story, about how dinosaurs, they'd made all this thing, and I believed it,
And you're like, wow, look at that. You know?
Yeah, then my husband, oh, he had such a good laugh over that. But anyway, um, but oftentimes, I think we can have very naive Christian programming that just
Hmm.
accepts anything and everything. And the way the programming is not understanding the light side of the system. It's like, this is dark over here. This is bad. We stay away from it. And all of
Hmm.
this is good. And so as long
It's
as it's in
good,
the story, so if it's in the church building, it's got to be good. If the pastor says it, it's got to be good,
right?
and not realizing
Or
everything.
it also extends then to the professional or the specialized category.
Mhm.
That because they say it, it must be true. It must be tested. It must be all right. If they say it's bad for me, that must be true, you know,
Trust the science.
right? Trust the science and or the medical, or the pharmakia. Um, yep. And they get you to just accept it without thinking through or asking the Lord yourself, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and I was raised in a medical family. My dad's a doctor, my mom's a nurse, and so it was always trust, you know, the professionals, they know what they're doing.
Hmm.
It's been a wake-up call on, multiple levels.
I agree. I think huge wake up calls for many people. I wonder how many really feel that too. Like, everything that we thought, we knew and trusted. I think back to, when I was growing up in the 80s, through the 90s, how many families or, friends' families did I have that, watched all of the daily shows on television, Oprah and all the others, and they would take all those housewife shows, everything that was out of there, had to be valid and true, and, families were run off of those things, and yet now we see, the very people that we trusted being the very people that, have been part of the plotting for our demise and the destruction of our families and family units.
Yeah, and particularly, I mean, we didn't have a lot of TV mostly growing up, but in my, later teens, we did watch NBC News at dinner time, around the
Mhm.
table. And so Tom Brokaw was our friend. I mean, he was there with us every single night, you know,
Right?
and it just becomes a part of life that it's like, he's got to be true. So it's challenging. What television, media, how it ingrains things in you.
Yeah. Or people, I think of too, like, growing up, there were people who were known by, their specialties or, you know, um, especially like in the church, it's like, oh, you honor that person because, they're an elder or, they're a matron or a patron. That person's invested, they've spent how much money on the children's program, you know, and so like you're taught like who you can trust and who are safe people, and you're taught not to question those people or challenge them in any way, you know, because they know they went to seminary all those years ago, they have studied the Bible, they've been a former pastor, you know.
And that's what I, personally, it's like leaders, pastors, they're just people like any of us. And I mean, my husband and I pastor,
Mhm.
but it's been this focus for us of being real and being vulnerable and being honest about the struggles that we go through so that people don't put us on a pedestal as much, because it becomes idolatry. It really is
Yeah.
idolatry. And it's bad for the person we're idolizing, and it's bad for us. Um, but our whole culture, is built around it. From
Mhm.
movie stars and music and the church. It's a whole system of a hierarchy system of honoring who's ever up on the top. Um,
Yeah.
Instead of the body of Christ that God talks about is that every person has something to contribute, and that was the way church used to be. In the early church was each person brings something to the gathering,
Mhm.
uh, instead of being spectators the whole time. So,
Yeah.
well, I'm curious. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but these gray areas that exist in all of the realms that we've talked about also exist in the trafficking movements.
Yeah.
And so even like I know that Tim Ballard has a new movie coming out, Sound of Freedom, and some,
Mhm.
people are like, no, no, don't go see it. Don't fund it because they're just trafficking children while they're making it look like they're not trafficking children. So I don't know. Um, how does a person know what is safe to watch and participate and what is better to
Yeah.
leave?
On the other hand, too, the argument is that, you know, do we do we support organizations when, they're helping to create awareness?
Yeah.
Um, for me as a kid, um, a lot of times this exact same situation is how things would get shut down, is that, nobody would be talking about um, you know, the the ritual stuff or the things that were really happening behind the scenes.
Mhm.
Um, so in a way, as sad as it is, I think that there's moments where we have to really embrace when something is being vocalized, um, and look at it that way too, that hey, we need to create awareness about this. How do we do that?
Yeah.
Um, many of us, we don't have the means to, really massively get the awareness out there.
Mhm.
The theaters is a huge thing. The
Yeah.
fact that they're actually allowing that topic and, people are beginning to learn about it and invest in it. Like that's what I want to see is that, they're investing in that awareness of what is really happening, and then they're gonna take that and then, begin the conversations in their home, in their work, in their community. Um, it is hard because who do you trust in this? There's a lot of people I certainly do not believe are good, who claim to be doing good, in the realm of anti-trafficking.
Mhm.
Um, so, there's a wide challenge there, and I think really, we can't tell each other what to do. I think really, each person needs to seek the Lord and say, Lord, do you want me to see that? Is it going to open doors of avenues of conversation, places where I go and with people I meet? Or, Lord, is more of the witness um, for me if I don't go,
Mhm.
if I take an active stance against this? I think that within that, um, both those decisions, I think that the Lord honors people in both of those. That we're going to see, people who are using that as an evangelistic tool,
Mhm.
um, as a way to promote those discussions. And I think we're going to see people that also are going to, have a witness and a testimony by abstaining from it. Um, I think it can be used both ways. And, you know, this is an area where, there isn't a scriptural verse that, um, it's kind of like when Paul talks to the Corinthians about, um, for their love feasts, that some of them were bringing meat,
Mhm.
but the meat they got was offered to idols because all the grocery stores in their day, the markets, the meat was always offered first to the idols. And they
Yeah.
were saying, well, how can you bring meat that's been offered to an idol to church?
Mhm.
There were some people who didn't want to consume it because it had been offered to idols. Yet there were those that were like, it's meat. God made it. He gave it to us. It's good for our bodies. Um, we can pray and we can rebuke any spirits attached to it. And now there's not a problem. We can, you know, eat
Mhm.
this meat. Um, so it's kind of the same situation. And what did Paul advise in that? You know, and not we're not saying that those that, have that element of fear or uncertainty are weak, but I'm using Paul's terms. He classified those that didn't want to eat the meat as the weaker brothers.
Yeah.
And he said, that the stronger ones were not to judge them for that. But at the same time, the weaker ones were not to judge the stronger brothers, that each were to do as the Lord led them to do.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is really one of those situations that, you know, that we can make that decision based on what God puts on our heart and what's right for us, but we're not necessarily to judge our other brothers. I mean, you can't say that all that money is only used for trafficking or that it's promoting or financing trafficking. Like that's where, the weaker brothers tend to go with that is, that you're promoting, your um, funding into trafficking. Well, at the same time, those who are stronger in that say, well, the Lord knows that everything I sow seed into is
Yep.
seed for the kingdom of God,
Mhm.
and that there's a redemptive work going on. Um, they're fighting for the gold refined by fire. So I think that that's the best way to approach that. Um, but it's difficult, because it's an undefined area in Scripture.
Yeah. Totally agree. And again, it's each one being led and not judging one another. Because the reality is, every day of our life, most likely we are connected into the system in some way. If we
Right.
use Amazon, if we use Google, if we go to Walmart, if we, any,
Well, we pay rent, we pay bills, I mean, who owns those companies? Who's getting the money at the end of the day? There's no we have to go to the grocery store and buy food or, go to a farmer, but we can choose Christian farmers or we can grow our own. But there's so many things in our lives that we don't have control over. Um, that it makes it difficult if you're one of those people saying, you're not going to feed into the system at all. That's quite the challenge and quite the endeavor to
yeah.
not do that.
I mean, I think you'd have to live off grid, completely off grid, out in the middle of nowhere, have owned your property, and not have any interaction with society to
Not
actually
have
be.
a vehicle or gas or,
Yes.
The Amish have it right. No, I'm just kidding.
Their own issues. They're infiltrated too. But
They're infiltrated too, which is the sad part. Even if you lived as the Amish, they're infiltrated too.
but I know I had there was similar controversy over, the Jesus Revolution movie. And,
Mhm.
I personally took the stand not to, because, with one of the main characters being a Knights Templar, I wasn't sure what kind of signaling he might be doing that, as an overcoming survivor, I'm still in process of, getting those things out of my life. And so I felt like I couldn't recommend it to survivors from the sense of, there could be some subtle things that could trigger certain things,
Yeah,
but being able to be aware of those things, and at the same time hearing reports of many people who went and were so powerfully moved and blessed, you know
yeah.
and so being able to trust God to lead each one of us
Mhm.
in, these decisions where it's like, well, should I be supporting that? Should I be, is there bad stuff in there that's gonna, do something? I mean, right now, almost anything in Hollywood is going to have all kinds of things, and so it's how do we approach it? If the Lord releases us to
Mhm.
go, I'm going with my eyes wide open now, not
Yeah.
just passively going, well, it's just entertainment. I'm just going to relax and zone out.
Right.
Yeah.
I had that happen back, in my early 20s. That was when the movie The Craft came to theaters, and we had about a month's notice, and the Lord had told me before it came to the theater that He wanted me to get a group of people together to pray and intercede, and He told us specifically to go to the movie, which
Um,
normally I probably would not have gone to a theater for a movie like that.
yeah.
But as we did that, it was quite the experience because we had real witches and warlocks that showed up at that premiere. And they, also a ton of young girls that came. And as we were sitting in there, literally those witches and warlocks out loud were casting spells. And like the main audience was like, you know, didn't even hear them, didn't even act like anything was happening, and we're just standing there, sitting there praying. We're like, "What in the world is going on with this? This is so surreal." And after it was done, those witches and warlocks began to target those girls and recruit and invite, and
Mm,
we were right alongside of them, witnessing to the girls as they were doing that. Being like, "No, you really don't want to go to that." Like, you're Christian, right? Well, look at what you're looking at, here's a witch standing right here, and they're trying to entice you with power and other things. Um, so, things like that do happen at movies. And, in fact, it was at a movie once that I had, an experience where there was trafficking of children. And the theater, the building right next door was abandoned, and, it was like this guy came in with me and my kids. Um, he had 2, kids with him, but I just kept looking, I'm like, "This guy can't be a dad." Like, he was just too young, and, I mean, a father of children when you see it, so you're like, "Okay, is this an uncle, a older brother?" Like, this is not a dad, yet he claimed to be a dad. And immediately, like we got snacks, and I noticed that, the little boy ran into the theater, but then I didn't see him again after that. So it was like, well, where'd that little boy go, And we found out later he had gone through the exit that was there in that theater room and had opened up then um, one of the doorways to the abandoned building. Um, and, then the little girl, she kept getting up, where at first it's like, okay, it's not even the movie hasn't even started. We're just at the commercials, and she's already gotten up like 10 times. No, I'm like, does she have disabilities? I mean, most children are not going to have to pee that much, You're like, what is she getting up for? And finally, I mean, it was so bad that I finally last time she got up, I got up too and went, and, bathroom doors were open, she was not in there. So it's like, okay, where is this little girl? Where is this guy who was with her? Um, and I saw the staff were really concerned too, trying to figure out like, they're like, yeah, something's not right with that situation. And you're like, no, no, it's not. Um, so being aware of these things, it'd be interesting, just keeping your eyes open. I think for those that do go see the movie, I think that is a good thing is that, it's going to show you how some of this has been operating, yet it's not the only way that
yeah.
things operate. So we have to keep that in mind as well.
That is so good. And I love how you were able to be right where you were meant to be, in that theater with the witches to be that
Hmm.
witness. And it's hard to know. Sometimes we see suspicious activity like you were mentioning, and it's like, what can I do? And
Mm,
one time we were driving across the United States, and it was during winter time. The roads were icy. There was two semis that jackknifed and completely cut off, the whole highway.
mm,
And so we saw that this had happened ahead of time, and got on our Google Maps, and it showed a possible way that we could get around it. And so we
mm.
went on this route, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles in, and then that road came to a dead end. And it was like, well, Google Maps is not working. And so we headed back to where we had left the main road, and there was a big truck stop there. And we thought, oh, well, we'll just stop here, use the restroom, and, get refreshed and so on. And so I went in the women's bathroom, and it was just me, and at the mirror was this Native American girl, just beautiful, and just staring at herself in the reflection. And, I thought that was kind of odd. I went into the stall, and then it kind of hit me. It was like, oh my, she's being trafficked to all these truckers here at this truck
Mm.
stop. And, my heart just went out to her, and it was just like praying, and just even reaching out in the spirit, just releasing the love of God, and just, speaking from my spirit, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this.
Yeah.
And I stayed in there longer than I needed to, just praying for her. And then as soon as I came out, she just darted out. But it was one of those things where our car was piled up, there wasn't any room in the back seat. And
Mhm.
but it was like, oh, if I could only grab this girl and put her in my car, and she could sit on my lap, and but at the same time, the practical thing is then I would be stealing
Yeah,
her.
they would immediately turn and hunt you and, come for her. That's the hardest part is that, how do you get them out safely?
Mhm.
Um, even if you're willing to put your own life in danger, um, still that doesn't solve the issue necessarily because it just means more people, you end up dead. Therefore, she has no more further help, and they still just take her back into the system. So, it really is difficult. I've heard a lot of different ideas, people that would leave, you know, if they had resources near them that helped, with trafficking or helped get trafficked women out, they would leave little cards in the bathroom stalls or, really those bathroom stalls are really the only place those women get a moment of privacy sometimes. Um, you know, or they would like sketch numbers on the stall walls or things like that. Um, but it's hard because they, usually their handlers are going to be checking over everything too
Yeah.
as they get in and get out. But if you leave something, some of these women will memorize the numbers.
Mhm.
When they get a chance to get away, that's what they'll call. But it is a very difficult situation.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I hear from some Christians is just like, the occult has all the power, they're organized, they're doing all of this stuff, and the church is just
Mhm.
passive and weak. And, what do you feel is the answer to that?
I think we need, that's part of the kingdom living with Jesse.com is that I think that we need to restore that authority
Yeah.
to believers in the church. And, what we teach in different things in there. I encourage people to take my land assignment course.
Mhm.
Um, I go, I go through kind of how the brotherhood works, how it operates, what you need to be aware of. But as you get into the second course for that, we begin to talk about, true prayer and intercession. Once you have that knowledge, how do you begin to tear down that wickedness in your community?
Mhm.
How do you restore the body of Christ to operating like it's supposed to be operating so you don't have that wickedness continuing? And really, it takes many of us to join together. you know, to make the mass impact that we were designed to have on this world. Scripture says that all creation waits in hopeful expectation for the revealing of the sons of God. The Lord applauds when we are ready to step into that place of authority and operate like we're supposed to.
Yeah. And I think there's different dimensions of that. There are
Mhm.
needed boots on the ground people, and there's also things that we can do from the heavenly realm, from the courts,
Right?
and partner with the Lord in that are amazing and fantastic. I know I lead a group every week called For the Least of These. And,
Hmm.
we just explore, with God, what can we do today? Um,
Hmm.
you know, we've done a lot in the spirit, and people go, well, they're just airy fairy stuff. How do you know if that's impacting the earth? Well, we just do it with the Lord. We just be obedient to Him
Hmm.
and believe that it is having an impact, as we're obedient to Him step by step.
Yeah.
In the area of the church, like, um, a lot of people are like, well, all the big churches are infiltrated, but then there's a lot of little churches in Midwest that, they say are all, our whole community that can be taken over by
Hmm.
the occult. Um, are there certain regions that are more concentrated in those areas? Or what are the signs that people can look for to be aware of?
Yeah. The biggest one I look for is perfectionism. Where you see those perfect communities, perfect lives, um, you know, that and where you see it promoted, that's usually where you got some brotherhood stuff going on in the cover lives. Um, but yeah, like, the regions that I grew up, knowing that were the most affected, I would say would be like, the northern states.
Mhm.
Definitely Wisconsin was one, Illinois, Chicago, Indianapolis, Ohio. You get a lot through there. Then you get kind of more of coastal areas, Washington, Oregon, um, you know, down the eastern coast, Salem, Massachusetts, all the way down to the Florida areas. And then you definitely got the southern areas too, Texas, Louisiana. I don't think that, it's rare that you'll find an area where you don't have brotherhood kind of infiltrating, but you definitely have areas that are worse than others. So,
Yeah. And I know the areas that I grew up in, again, were coastal, California,
mhm,
Washington, and then in Virginia. And so definitely experienced things in those places. So it was interesting because I think I even mentioned where we were in Virginia. We were out in the middle of nowhere. And
mhm,
yet, you know, later found out we were, 10 miles from a major underground facility and then some other things you
mhm,
mentioned, and it's our only safe place is, in God, as
yep,
our protector. And, um, he puts us in places to be a light. We just, in the last year moved to Texas, and I did not want to move to Texas other than, I was excited about our first grandbaby. But there was nothing about Austin that appealed to me in any way. And
mhm,
when I go into the downtown, I can feel all this stuff, and it's just like, "Get
yeah,
me out of here." But the Lord said, He said, "This is an upgrade for you. I've prepared you for this." And,
mhm,
it's like, "Okay, I'm here for a reason." Wherever you are listening, you're there for a reason. God has a plan and
yep,
purpose for you to be light, to be salt, to bring His kingdom.
mhm,
And, to me, it's time for us to wake up as Christians, not to be sleepy, Laodicean, just caught up in our own little perfectionism stuff,
right?
and be what we're meant to be here. So,
I agree. Couldn't agree more.
Is there anything you want to share as we get ready to close, Jessie?
No, I think that's good for today. Yeah, great discussion on just some of the things that, I was thinking back as we were talking about signs, things that we're looking for. I know, I think some of them have been put up on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com, but we have a section called Conversations that have a lot of video clips. So you can scroll through there. I believe that some of the um, times I've talked about different signs, symbols, things that you're looking for, you can find there. Um, I know, there's been some blogs that have been done that really get into breaking down the signs, the symbols of the Illuminati. And so look for those resources, those will help you. And then definitely, if you want to really get into it, you can attend the land assignment coaching that I do, which is free, and you can attend as many as you want to attend. The nice thing is that each time we do it, it's always different. We got different people coming in, different locations, and we discuss those locations. So it really is a wealth of information. Learning how to interpret those signs and symbols that are used in the system, um, that mean different things. So
That is so good. And the encouragement along with that, not that we don't move from fear. And
mhm.
also, you know, because I've seen some people get so into the signs and symbols that that's all they can think and talk about.
Right.
And I know in my own life, I can be fascinated by certain things and like, oh, I want to know more about this. This is fascinating. But coming back to that place of, I want to be fascinated with Jesus alone. And
Mhm.
um, he'll lead us to what we need to see when we need to see it. And he'll show us these things, what is the true, what
Yeah.
is the false, as we submit in obedience to him. And so that to me is the beauty of this journey. And great
Yes.
resources. I want to get in on those land assignments because that's very interesting to me. I know I'm here in Texas for a reason, and
Yep, absolutely.
wherever you are, you're there for a reason as well. So thank you so much, Jesse. Always such a
Yeah,
privilege,
thank you.
and just encourage you as listeners to like, subscribe, and share. If you know somebody who this would touch, would be helpful to wake up and to see with clear eyes what the Lord has for us. Please share. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on Testimony Mountain.